All right. My name is Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined once again by returning champ, me and Djene Bajalan, coming to us from Springfield, but not the one with the cats. Oh no, I can't hear you. Try saying something? Yeah, I didn't hear that. Well, while Gene is sorting out his tech.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. That was yes. I'm in another Springfield, a bigger Springfield, but there are cats here. I don't know if people are eating those cats, but
yeah, it is actually funny because true story. I have a good friend I went to high school with who lives in that Springfield, the one in Ohio that people were talking about, and a couple weeks ago, I had a Skype drink with him, and he told me about, people are, saying that like Haitian refugees are eating the cats. And like, he reported this to me as some like insane bullshit that he saw people saying in like the comment section on local media. And so we had this whole conversation about it. So in the 2 weeks after that conversation, seeing that story gain national traction to the point that Donald Trump said it on a debate stage has really been something.
That was the best part of the debate. They're eating the cats. They're eating people's pets. I mean, whatever. Perhaps some of the cats around here should be eaten, and some of the dogs. It's a perfectly good source of protein. I don't know why people are squeamish about it. I thought Americans appreciated people living off the land and hunting, but all of a sudden, it's a big problem now.
Yeah, don't eat the cats, people. But yeah, or the dogs. Yeah, no, for sure. I think it did grab everybody's attention. I saw Crystal Ball saying that she was at like her kids' like soccer practice or something, and saying like some of the other parents who like she's never heard express a single opinion about politics ever were like, wait, what was the thing about the cats?
Well, it's just one of these silly stories that picks up. There's no evidence for it as far as I know.
No, definitely not.
And I've seen people on YouTube videos saying that, they're eating the cats. Well, a lot of those people saying that look like they've maybe been partaking in the methamphetamine.
Yes, I think that.
And they have been using some rather choice language to refer to people. It's just a bizarre story. It's one of these bizarre stories that just gets spread and becomes kind of gospel on the right. So, what can you do about it?
Yeah, well, fair enough. So speaking of goings on the right, the debate we're going to watch today is between two people who are both on the right, actually, and both on the same portion of the right, who are Walter Block and Dave Smith, who are both hardcore libertarians, like, privatize the sidewalks kind of libertarians. And, they're both people who I've debated before, Walter Block quite recently, and on this, but they're on opposite sides of this about Palestine, because, Dave Smith, whereas I do think he's wrong about a good 95% of subjects, certainly at least as far as domestic policy goes, would seem to at least be consistent enough about libertarianism to object to forcing millions of people to leave their homes and dropping lots and lots of bombs on refugee camps and things like this, all of which on the face of them would seem to violate, libertarian principles. And then, Walter Block has a different perspective.
I think that's an important thing to understand because, although being quote unquote pro-Palestinian is, let's say, left coded as an issue, there's nothing inherently left wing about the principle of national self-determination, or even, the notion of secular, democratic, unified Israel-Palestine state based on kind of universal principles of citizenship. This is a position that can be taken, it can be taken by people on the right and supported by kind of right-wing liberal theories, but it's also taken by people on the left. I think one of the ironies is, whether you agree with it or not, being pro-Palestine and being pro-Ukraine is actually the kind of like principled position. You're defending national self-determination of people who are being denied that national self-determination. Whereas because these issues have become kind of left and right coded, you tend to have people, on one hand are like defending Ukraine to the hilt, and saying, well, maybe the Nazis are bad in Ukraine, but we should support Ukraine in principle. And then they'll be frothing at the mouth about Palestine, but it's kind of an incoherent position. And the same is true of the kind of anti-imperialist left, because I'm pretty sure that the minute that Israel does its pivot to Russia to get all its raw materials, you're going to find the very same people screaming about like Palestine as a cause of anti-imperialism will flip around. So I think it's interesting how these issues get left and right coded, but actually both on the left and both on the right, there is a kind of like discussion to be had about these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are internally consistent positions that people take in different directions on them. There is certainly an inconsistent position that some people take, right? I mean, you're sort of, you're sort of very based online anti-imperialist. Like those people are actually just like anti-American imperialism. So I think that they are, inconsistent in exactly the way that you're saying, right? That they're like all in favor of, Russia attacking Ukraine or China attacking Taiwan or whatever. The place where I would always hold the line is just that, of course, if you're consistently anti-imperialist, you shouldn't make excuses for, Russia attacking Ukraine, but then it's an entirely different discussion what that means about what you think U.S. policy, should be in response, right? I mean, those are just two different issues. Like, I don't, I'm certainly very opposed to the United States sending Israel 2,000-pound bombs to drop on schools and hospitals in Gaza. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm out there advocating for some other country, shipping weapons to Hamas. That's just, that's just a further question, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Americans could do the classic thing where they ship weapons to both sides, which would be, the true American patriotic position.
Fair enough. Well, nobody here is advocating the true American patriotic position. But yeah, I do definitely take your point earlier that, it's left coded, but it's sort of, in a certain sense, I mean, obviously I'm not talking about real world politics here, which, don't align with this, but, in principle, this actually should be conceptually prior to most of the big left-right, divisions, because the issue about, the current status of the Palestinians, right, that whether you think the right, solution is a single democratic state or or two states or what, right? I mean, what you've had since 1967 is a single apartheid state, and the objection to that is just about, I mean, look, it's a violation of bourgeois democratic rights that we're all supposed to, sort of like everybody but the wackiest reactionaries theoretically agrees with.
Right, exactly. I think, if national self-determination is a kind of key principle that lots of people have, not just people on the left, then this is not really a left or right issue. And even from the American imperial standpoint, you have people like Mersheimer who have written critically of the Israeli lobby, and this is also a question of American imperial policy, because on one hand, Israel in some ways serves the American national interest. Biden famously said, if it wasn't there, we'd have to create it. But at the same time, Israel also creates complications for American imperial policy as well. So there's nothing inherently, there's nothing inherently left wing about supporting Palestinian national self-determination or Palestinian rights, or just the notion that Palestinians should be treated equally and have the same rights as Israeli citizens do in their homeland.
Right. Yeah, exactly. All right. Let's get started. So we've got Dave Smith, Walter Block. By the way, I don't know for anybody who saw my debate on this topic with Walter Block last week. I'm going to be fascinated to see if he brings in his stuffed animals. When he was debating me, he had like a toy pig and a toy rabbit who he was using to illustrate a hypothetical about human shields. So that's the kind of thing that I think is on the table when Block is in play, but let's find out.
Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to the Tom Woods Show.
Yeah, I think we took some flamethrowers to various narratives earlier. I'm good with that.
I like the music.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It is episode 2538 of the Tom Woods Show, and I have with me a couple of people you are very likely to have heard of, Dave Smith and Walter Block. Dave, from Part of the Problem, his wildly successful podcast. He's a stand-up comedian. You've seen him on all kinds of high-profile outlets, Joe Rogan many times, Tucker Carlson, Piers Morgan, and the list goes on and on. And we also have Walter Block, who is a professor of economics at Loyola University, New Orleans, author of, sometimes it seems like every book that's ever been written. He's got a list of, I don't know how many academic articles in economics. How many peer-reviewed articles are you up to now, Walter?
730.
730. So that's a lot. And of course, I think if you are in any way informed about the libertarian world, you are aware of the controversy that has arisen around the subject of Israel, the Middle East, Hamas, etc. And so Walter has been very outspoken in support of Israel against Hamas. And this has led to a lot of back and forth, maybe not as much back and forth as you would think, a lot of forth, not very much back to Walter. But today we're going to change that because we've got Dave, who is a very high profile libertarian figure, here to talk back and forth with Walter. And I was telling these two gentlemen, I want to be pretty hands off here. Unless there's too much crosstalk, I'll try to cut that out. Or if somebody keeps interrupting, I'll try to cut that out. But basically, I just want these two people to be able to talk to each other. And so the way we arranged it, we have a more or less a resolution. The resolution being the proper libertarian position is to support Israel in its war with Hamas. Now, it's customary in debates for the person taking the affirmative side to go first, but no rules can bind us, ladies and gentlemen. So we've decided instead to do it the other way, to let Dave speak first, followed by Walter. So Dave, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks for having me again, Tom, and thank you, Walter, for coming on. So I've done quite a few of these debates on the topic of Israel-Palestine over the last year. And I just recently debated an objectivist for the first time. And this is the first time I'm debating a Rothbardian on the topic. And while there are advantages and disadvantages or costs and benefits to doing these types of debates, one of the things that's interesting to me is that typically I'm going out and I'm debating Democrats or Republicans, and we have, let's just say, wildly different worldviews. And these are statists and collectivists. And it's a little bit different when you're talking to somebody who's a Rothbardian, and at least presumably we're coming from this with a lot of the same foundations. So I would say that number one, to the resolution, it is not only is it not correct that the libertarian position ought to be to support Israel in this war, it is completely incompatible with every single libertarian principle to support Israel in any capacity. Israel is the government owns, I think, close to 90% of the land. They have conscription. They by any of the standards, if you go back and listen to all of the thousands of episodes of the Tom Woods Show, it's all just different reasons why we could never support an institution like the government of Israel. And that's not even getting into their treatment of the Palestinian people. I would also mention that, let's just say, if you pay attention to the U.S. foreign policy establishment over the last, probably 50 years, but particularly over the last 20 years, let's say with the terror wars, let's just say Israel is a player in that game. I'm not going quite to the lengths that some go to. I'm not saying that Israel completely controls American foreign policy, but they have an oversized influence. And they've certainly been advocating for every single one of the terror wars that we've fought over the last 20 years. And they've been strongly advocating that we fight more, namely against Iran. There's just no getting around the fact that though that is not our team, we are on the team that is against these wars. And anybody who's longest serving prime minister comes over and testifies before our Congress advocating as a regional expert that we go to war with Saddam Hussein, that we go to war to overthrow the regime in Iran, overthrow the regime in Libya, in Syria, and on, is simply something that we shouldn't support. Like, obviously, on the face of it, we oppose the warfare state. And so anybody who's advocating that we continue with it ought to not be supported by us. One of the other major issues that I see, and by the way, I will say that Tom Woods, for people who know my history, I was first introduced to libertarianism by Ron Paul's presidential campaign in 2008. It was actually in 2007 that I first found him. And then it was finding Tom Woods that really converted me to being a libertarian. And you introduced me to Murray Rothbard. And I don't remember where you said this, but I swear it's true, that Tom Woods said, if you're going to read Murray Rothbard, the first two pieces you have to start with are Anatomy of the State and War, Peace, and the State. And I just reread War, Peace, and the State for the first time in years the other day. And I would highly recommend anyone listening to it read it. Just go read that. And it very simply explains why libertarians cannot support what Israel is doing to Gaza right now. You simply don't have a right to. It's you cannot deduce anything from our first principles that will get you to a point where it's okay to slaughter innocent people in the way that they have been. In addition to that, I'd like to make one other point that I think I tried to make in my last debate with the objectivist, and that is just that, and this is why I bring up the peace, war, peace, and the state. For a Rothbardian, like any of the three of us, if we were talking about a local policing matter, and there was somebody who had, committed an act of terrorism and then run into a school to use human shields to hide from them, and the local police department came down and said, all right, we're just going to blow up the school. We would all be appalled by that and opposed to that in the harshest possible language. We would all recognize that for the evil that it is. That people, innocent people, even if they are being held hostage, have natural rights, and you don't have a right to. They don't forfeit their rights because there's a criminal in their vicinity. So when we now are talking about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, those moral rules don't just go away. And I think that this is the foundation of Rothbardianism. The essentially the central foundational claim that Murray Rothbard made was that the moral characteristics of a government are not different just because they're a government. And the rules of morality don't stop applying. And that if a government does something, the moral character of that action is the same as it would be if a group of people did it. After all, government is an artificial social construct. And if I just say I'm the government, that doesn't mean I can go out and behave in a different way, morally speaking, than somebody who's just a private actor. And essentially that leads to the conclusion that governments are criminal organizations. So there's really no way that you can have a completely different standard for how Israel is allowed to treat the Palestinian people versus how we would be allowed to treat a criminal matter within our country without rejecting the core tenets of Rothbardianism. If there is a difference, if there is kind of a micro morality and a macro morality, then that cancels out pretty much everything Murray Rothbard ever said. So I think from the libertarian position, it's all we have to do is read War, Peace, and the State to know what we would support and what we wouldn't support. And in terms of supporting the nation of Israel or the government of Israel, well, just look at their track record. They are the enemies of liberty. They're a criminal organization, and I think that Murray Rothbard had it right. So I'm happy with that as an opening.
All right, Walter.
I don't know that there's a tremendous amount to say about this. It is kind of interesting, for me at least, to watch this because, as I said, I just debated Walter Block about this. We just ran that like on the show, it was like a few weeks ago. We just like ran it on the show last week. And, in a way, this is kind of a hyper-specific version of the case I was trying to make to him, which is, hey, man, I don't agree with any of your libertarian stuff, but I cannot for the life of me see how you think it's consistent, with supporting what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. And this is just kind of the, libertarian nerd version of that where you're, it's, I was speaking in a much more general way and, and he's like, hey, what about this like specific libertarian writer that we all like? And he said X, Y, and Z, but it's kind of a version of the same point.
Yeah. I mean, it seems, if you're going to take this non-aggression principle stuff seriously and view the state as the cause of war in the world, it seems logical to apply that to the state of Israel. I think he made quite a pretty strong case how, if you had an analogous event taking place in the United States with police using excessive force against, a terrorist, you would be against that. But suddenly, so that should be applied to the state of Israel. So I think he comes up with kind of a consistent position, or at least given that libertarians, whether this is true or not, market themselves as being the premier anti-war force. This seems to be a consistent position to be holding.
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, I like the fact that he said that about human shields right off the bat. When I was debating Walter, I've written about the human shields thing elsewhere, and I didn't get that much into it, even though he was very into it. I just kind of referred people to what I'd said elsewhere because there's other fish that I wanted to fry. But I like the fact that Dave starts out kind of foreground in that. Like what he's saying here is a version of the point that like Anna made when she went on the PBD podcast where they're saying the human shields thing. And, of course, there are a lot of ways you can respond to that. You can point out that Amnesty International, whereas they do not like Hamas and they've accused Hamas of lots of other violations of the laws of war, keeps on clearing them of that one, when they investigate, after there's flare-ups, between Israel and Hamas. And you can sort of point out the absurdity of the way that we talk about, that to the extent that all people really mean by human shielding is just kind of keeping military stuff close to civilian stuff, We could talk about the many absurd double standards there in terms of, various military stuff that the United States and Israel keep very close to civilian stuff. But I think this is actually the most powerful response of the three, which is just to say, hey, let's just take the premise. Anna's point on PBD was she asked the host, it's like, hey, do you have kids? And he said no. And she said, okay, well, how about your mom? I've heard you talk about your mom. Imagine that, in an actual hostage situation, right? There was, somebody like a terrorist or bank robber was using your mom as a human shield. Would you therefore think it was totally fine for the cops to shoot the hostage taker through her? And of course, he just changes the subject because there kind of is no response to that, right? Nobody would actually apply this to human shields whose humanity they took seriously. So yeah, I think this seems pretty strong. So I think the really interesting part is going to be what comes next and see how Walter responds.
Thanks for inviting me, Tom, and Dave. Thanks for participating. And I think Dave is absolutely right that the two of us start from the same premises, and we come to I won't call it 180 degrees off, but I'll call it 179 degrees off. We disagree very much, but this is not the only time that this occurs. For example, you can't get two better libertarians than Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul. And they start from the same premises. And yet one is pro-life and the other is pro-choice. And pro-life and pro-choice are not 179 degrees off, they're 180 degrees off. And also on immigration, Hans Hoppe is a sterling libertarian, and so is Bumper Hornberger, and yet they diverge on immigration. Call it 179 degrees there. So it should not occasion any shock or surprise, a gigantic surprise, that yes, Dave and I start from the same place and we come out in opposite directions. Why? Well, we're stupid. I'm including me and Dave here, and all libertarians who disagree. We're confronted with horrendously difficult issues, and our brain power is limited. We're not stupid, but we're not as smart as we'd like to be. And that's probably why we diverge. Now, I agree exactly with Dave when he says Israel owns 90% of the land and has a draft, and therefore is not exactly libertarian. I'm putting it in my own words, but we agree on that. And I think also that Israel is very guilty of U.S. imperialism all over the world, certainly including Iran. So we start off from the same premises, but the way I look at it, it's not how good is Israel. That's not the question. The question is, how good is Israel compared to Hamas? And when you look at it that way, Israel is very, very close to libertarianism, and Hamas is just the very opposite. Dave makes a very good point that here's a murderer who runs into a school, and now what do we do? I want to distinguish that from what Hamas actually does. And the way I'm going to distinguish with that is I'm going to make Tom a Jew, and I'm Hamas. And Tom, you're a dirty Jew, you're a kike, I hate you, you're evil, I'm going to kill you. And I have here a knife. Well, it's a pen, but what the heck, work with me. I have a knife, I'm going to kill you. Tom, not only am I going to kill you, you kike, I'm going to kill your wife and your kids and your parents and your cousins and all your friends that are near you. I'm going to kill you all. And I've got a knife and I'm very powerful. You happen to have a gun. And I have 3 children strapped to the front of me. Here's a rabbit. Here's a pig. And here is a trophy that I once won in a competitive race walking race. And I've got them all strapped to the front of me. There they are. And I'm going to come kill you because you're the vermin who Hitler started in on the right path, but he didn't finish the job. I'm going to finish the job. I'm going to get you. The only way you can stop me is to shoot me. And if you shoot me, you'll necessarily get these 3 innocent people. If you don't shoot me, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your whole family. What do you do? What do you do as a libertarian? Well, to me, the essence of libertarianism is two principles, and I'm sure Dave and Tom would agree with me. The two principles are the non-aggression principle and private property rights based on homesteading. Those are our principles. We all agree. No divergence there. Well, Tom, you going to shoot me or not? Well, if you don't shoot me, libertarian is not a suicide pact. You don't have to worry about these three innocent people. Why? Because I have this thing called negative homesteading. Now, I've written 3 or 4 articles on negative homesteading. We all know what positive homesteading is. You mix your labor with land and you own it. What's negative homesteading? Negative homesteading is I now have a wristwatch and lightning hits me. And with this lightning and with this wristwatch, I can pawn it off onto Dave. Am I allowed to do that? No. I have to keep the misery. I've homesteaded the misery. I got to keep the misery. I can't pawn it over onto Dave because that would violate the non-aggression principle. Namely, I'm the first recipient of the misery, and I got to keep the misery. I can't give it to somebody else, even if I have the ability with my magic wristwatch. Well, these people here are the first homesteaders of the misery. I captured them. How did I do it? Well, I put my rocket launchers in mosques. I put my ammunition in schools. I put it in hospitals, and then I start launching rockets at Israel. And when Israel bombs me back, I give them this argument about murderers running into schools that they just gave. No, I reject that. I think that Tom has every right to shoot me. And the only way he's going to shoot me is through these innocent people that I captured. These are my 3 children, let's say. There's a wonderful cartoon where there's a Hamas guy who says, death to all Jews. And he's got his little baby on his lap. And the baby's got dynamite around him to indicate suicide bombing. And then Netanyahu is sitting there. And the guy from the UN says, can't you meet him halfway? No. You don't meet them halfway. They want to kill all the Jews. And the way they kill all the Jews is first they give a shield of their own people. And then they say, in effect, it's illicit. And Dave buys this. And Dave says, well, it's like the running into a school. No, it's different. It's different. It's very different. Yes, because the murderer who ran into a school is not capturing them. There's a disanalogy. There's a difference between what Hamas is doing and what Dave is ascribing them to do. It's a gigantic difference. It's a 180-degree difference. No, Tom, the Jew, has a right to defend himself and his family. And if it means shooting people that Hamas has captured and puts them in front of them, then they're justified in doing it. Now, some people say, well, it's proportionality. The Hamas only killed 1,200 people on October 7th, and Israel has now killed, the latest figure, I think, is 40,000. And this is vastly disproportionate. Well, I don't buy into that. I think that proportionality is good for punishment. As a Rothbardian, if you steal bubble gum, it's less of a crime than rape. And rape is less of a crime than murder, and the punishment should fit the crime, and now you have proportionality. But self-defense, I don't think proportionality rises. Israel has a right to defend itself, and Hamas is still sending over rockets and is still got 100 captives, hostages. And while this is true, Israel has a right to go and hunt down every Hamas fighter. And if the fighters hide behind their own children, too bad for the children and too bad for Hamas. Golda Meir, former prime minister of Israel, once said, peace will come when, this is just a paraphrase, I can't do justice, she said it beautifully, peace will come when the Palestinians or the Hamasians love their children more than they hate us. Right now, they hate us more than they love their children. So they put their children as shields. Can anything more despicable than that be possible to conceive? I don't think so. So while I agree with Dave that Israel is not a libertarian society, and Israel has got all sorts of problems from the libertarian point of view, I'd be the first to admit that. But the real issue is not how good is Israel from a libertarian point of view. From a libertarian point of view, look, we have two boxers, and or maybe we have two gymnasts, and both gymnasts are imperfect. No gymnast is ever perfect. And it's our job as referee of the gymnastics is to pick the better one. So it's no good to say, well, gymnast A is imperfect, therefore we're against A. No, you have to say, here's A, here's B, which is closer to perfection. Well, which is closer to perfection? Israel is closer to libertarian perfection. Now, just a word about Murray. Dave read some recent pieces of Murray. I just read For New Liberty, and I read the chapter on war. And Murray says, libertarians are against war, period. And that's an exact quote. No, that's not right. Murray is wrong. Look, just because we're off-boarding, this doesn't mean we have to agree with everything that Murray ever said. And Murray contradicted himself. He favored the war of the South against the North in 1861, and he favored the war of the 13 colonies against Great Britain in 1776. The proper libertarian position is not anti-war. Antiwar.com, an amazingly good libertarian organization, is wrong. That title is wrong. Lou Rockwell says they're, anti-war, pro-free enterprise or something like that. That's wrong. We libertarians are not anti-war. Anti-war is pacifism. We libertarians are anti-offensive war. But we're not anti-defensive war. Look, the NBA is going to be starting up soon. And when the other team has the ball, everyone yells defense, defense. They can distinguish between defense and offense. We have to distinguish between defense and offense. Well, who's on the defense and who's on the offense? Hamas is on the offense. Hamas is engaged in genocide. What's genocide? Genocide is when you aim at civilians. Israel doesn't aim at civilians. Israel aims at Hamas fighters, and it gets civilians because it's collateral damage, and they have to do that. In every war, there's always collateral damage. Israel is justified in fighting a war because look at what they did on October 7th. They aimed at civilians. That is genocide, and then they've been sending over bombs forever. I'll end with a quote from Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu said, if we put down our arms, there'll be no more Israel. If Hamas puts down its arms, there'll be peace.
Hey, everybody, Clown World is getting crazy.
Clown World is getting crazier.
Yeah. It's the old joke from The Simpsons, when they threaten to replace the radio DJs with the machine that's programmed, with Little Pig, peppy morning radio observations. And, one of them is, those clowns in Congress have done it again. And one of the DJs is like, oh my God, how does it keep up with the news like that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was just a regular, it was a bit of a weird version of the defense, but that's just the classic conservative defense of Israel. I think it's rooted perhaps in a selective notion of when history begins. So history begins on October the 7th, so it has to be viewed as this is an offense. It's portrayed as being this Hamas offensive war, and also correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of eliding two things: the use of state power to fight war and an individual's right to defend themselves. Maybe, if you were talking about, let's say, somebody on a kibbutz, right, and a Hamas fighter is running at them, literally right at that moment, with 6 babies strapped to them, threatening to kill them, and they get shot, well, okay, I can see the logic from the libertarian position. That's like a personal defense issue, right? But that's not what we're talking about. We're actually talking about like the mobilization of state power to, run basically whatever you want to call it, a war like a total war against the population of Gaza. I mean, yeah, I mean, like, this isn't just a fight between Hamas and the Israeli state. You know, Palestinians in Gaza don't have a choice of, you know, whether they want to support Hamas or not, right? Like, they don't have a choice of whether they're going to participate in this war. And it's, you know, like, it's a tiny piece of land. If you're going to fight a war on this tiny piece of land, you know, inevitably everything is going to be next to a civilian target. So I just find this like a very, it's only interesting as an argument in the sense that it is a weird version of the argument with stuffed toys and a trophy and things like that. But it's basically a defense of the use of excessive military powers. That I mean, and you could just invert the argument as well, right? So, like, you could say, well, you know, I don't know, the Israelis are maintaining an occupation in the West Bank. Let's say you accept the argument that Israel isn't responsible for Gaza. Gaza, they withdrew from it, blah, blah, blah. Well, they haven't withdrawn from the West Bank. So when Israeli soldiers come, then, you know, like, what do you expect is going to happen? They're going to shoot them. And if they get, like, civilians and things like that, a settler or whatever, it's terrible as well. It just seems like a kind of silly argument, to be honest. And it's just unoriginal. It's just like a libertarian sheen over a pretty mainstream, uninteresting argument, which is kind of hysterical about, like, you know, I don't think Israel is under an existential threat.
No, it's clearly not under an existential threat. Like, I mean, this is, I mean, the fact that the,
I mean, put it another way, Ben. If this attack had happened, right, and then Israel started running like a whole load of assassination campaigns, right? You know, like sending in commandos and they're shooting Hamas fighters here and there and stuff like that. You know, we might still be opposed to that and say this is counterproductive for the peace process, et cetera, et cetera. They've got to negotiate or whatever, right? But, you know, that would be a kind of different argument from like what's happening now, which is like the complete annihilation of like the viability of Gaza as a place to live.
Yeah, I mean, there was a UN report several months ago saying that it would take about 80 years to rebuild Gaza at this point. So, you know, presumably you could add on quite a bit to that. And, you know, of course, Netanyahu's coalition includes people who spent their whole political careers advocating the mass deportation of the entire Palestinian population. So, you know, I think that what Israel is doing makes a lot of sense if you think that's the goal. It makes very little sense if you think the goal is to, is to end Hamas after the, you know, last 20 years of the American war on terror, showing exactly how this works in practice, right? I mean, you know, the United States spent literally 20 years, you know,
I just keep thinking,
you know, like you know, wiping out the Taliban, right? You know, so I mean, I think that as a goal realistically makes very little sense. But I think making Gaza so unlivable that, you know, lots of people will accept, you know, voluntary exile somewhere else. Like, I think that makes perfect sense as a, you know, as a goal to actually make sense of Israeli actions.
I mean, the closest comparison I can think of in modern times is the Russian war in Chechnya, to be honest. I mean, and you know, like from a realpolitik, and I was talking to a colleague of mine who is a Zionist who's served in the IDF, etc. And, you know, even he was making this point that this operation is, you know, like, you know, he's been opposed to Bibi, but he thinks there should be a response to Hamas. But he made the point, and even he agreed with this, was that this could just end up like what happened in Chechnya, where you get rid of one set of leaders that you think are the worst possible people you could be dealing with, and you get something worse. Just like we saw in Iraq. People were like, well, we have Al-Qaeda. there can't be anything worse than Al Qaeda. Then 10 years later, boom, we've got ISIS, which is worse than Al Qaeda, right? So, like from a realpolitik perspective, I think there's some major even if you don't care about Palestinians, if you only care about the state of Israel, this seems to be a counterproductive thing. The other point is, people will go, well, Hamas is terrible. Well, I'll give you an analogy, right? Okay, let's say Hamas is terrible and they need to be removed from power. Okay, let's say that's a given. What is the force removing it from power, right?
Right.
It's like, okay, European colonialism in Indonesia, Dutch colonialism in Indonesia was terrible. American colonialism in the Philippines was terrible. So does that mean that like the Japanese offensive was going to be successful liberating?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you want the anti-communist version of this, it's like, well, the anti-communist version would be, you might want the Ukrainians to be liberated from Stalin's oppression, but who's the people doing the liberation? It's the Nazis. So it's probably going to end up in a bad situation. Sometimes, you're in this kind of situation. So, like this argument just was not an interesting argument beyond the fact that this guy looks like, I don't know, he looks like kind of like a Mennonite or something, and is talking really weirdly, just making the same old argument that you can go to Fox News or MSNBC or anything and watch.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. I think that if there's value to this, it's that he's willing to be so much franker about the consequences than most of those people are. But yeah, I guess I would just make 3 points here. I think that, your question about, when do you start the clock is a really important one. And, this is also why, and, related to that, actually, I think certainly from an American perspective, where the real issue is like, should the United States be involved in supporting this? I think, what you think about Hamas is a complete non-issue there. I think, like, if you imagine a world where the African National Congress had been defeated or co-opted, and so the main force fighting the apartheid government in South Africa was some hideously reactionary group of Black nationalist Christian fundamentalists. Okay, I wouldn't like that, but that wouldn't change how I felt about apartheid, right? Or how I felt about how I would feel about the United States, propping up apartheid.
And there's also this kind of notion, that he's putting forward that, it's implied that all the Palestinians want to kill all the Jews. I mean, obviously, there are people who have genocidal intent or who would do that. I mean, you see it on the Israeli side. There was just a couple of days ago, those 2 Israeli podcasters talking about pressing the button and getting rid of all the Palestinians. People will say that things. But, people can also get over things. Things aren't perfect here in the United States. But they literally enslaved Black people in this country for 200, 300 years. And, after there was a long struggle after it. But, I would say, despite what some of the, what some perhaps, journalists and academics might say, things are better than they were during slavery. And race relations are clearly better than they were in the 1960s. So,
I mean, look, there are like, today, yes, clearly, right? Things are dramatically better, right? I'd always recommend Adolf Reed's book, The South, for people who are forgetful on this point. He's like very clear on this, what it was like growing up in that system versus what it's like now. And, you have people, you have lots of Jews living in Germany now. You have, the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors who are like friends with the grandchildren of Nazis. People do, these things are definitely not frozen in time. But yeah, I think the question about genocidal intent is a lot less interesting than the question about genocidal capacity. Right now, Hamas, obviously, Hamas no more has the capacity to commit genocide against Israeli Jews than Al-Qaeda had the capacity to overthrow the U.S. government and install a caliphate, in 2001, right? I mean, that's just, not like a real thing, right? The thing that, the people who have both the intention and the capacity are, the Israeli government right now. which is why you're actually getting millions of people. The vast majority of the population is in Gaza, dispossessed from their homes by gunpoint. You have the largest population of, child amputees in the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, just the two quick points I wanted to make about Walter's presentation are, one, on this point about capacity, he said, the question is not, is Israel, living up to our, libertarian ideals? The question is, is Israel or Hamas closer? It's like, no, that's not the question. Why would that be the question? I mean, if apply this to other situations, that, I would rather live under George W. Bush than Saddam Hussein, right? Like, I would rather George W. Bush be president of the United States than Saddam Hussein be president of the United States, but I still didn't support the invasion of Iraq. Right. Like, and presumably Walter didn't either. Right. Despite thinking that Saddam Hussein's government was in many ways further from his libertarian ideals than even Bush's.
This is always the way that the debate kind of gets warped, and often quite disingenuously, is like when you oppose a particular military action or intervention, you're accused of supporting the other side. Right. And obviously that's just the way that, propaganda works. They try and create this kind of, you're with us, or you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, right? And, you would think that 20 years of a failed war on terror would get some people to kind of rethink the logic, even from the realpolitik point of view. Because at the end of the day, obviously Hamas is to blame for the things that Hamas does. Like,
sure,
Hamas has political agencies. And there is struggle, there is violence, there is resistance, and resistance to occupation, even under international law, is a legitimate action. But that doesn't mean that every kind of resistance should be, it should be condoned, right? But if you're looking at the broader picture, Hamas's rise to power is also a product of failures of Israeli policies, like the Israeli policies that have, indirectly and directly led to the metastasization of political Islam in places like Gaza. Bibi Netanyahu, it's like documented, was allowing the money to get, go across to support Hamas. They had a policy to keep the Palestinian movement divided. And it was kind of working until it didn't, right? They tried to insulate Israel against this. Ultimately, this was a huge political failure. The Israeli state created the conditions for this kind of action to take place. I mean, Hamas should give back the hostages. They shouldn't be hostages. But at the same time, as much as people try and act like it's different, like administrative detention is taking hostages.
Totally.
Implementing policies pioneered by the British colonial administration to destroy the houses of the families of people who were caught in terrorist operations. Again, collective punishment. This creates the conditions for this. The Israeli state, the problem is they keep reproducing the same conditions that give rise to this. Does that mean every single actor on, every single Palestinian actor is responsible or doing the right thing or approaching politics? No, but when you're trying to identify who is shaping the ultimate conditions within which this conflict is taking place, it's the Israeli state that has the capacity, as you say, it has control of things. Again, talking to my friend, he was criticizing the Palestinian movement. Well, they've made this mistake, this thing empowered the hardliners. I said, yeah, okay, that may all be true, but you can't tell me with a straight face, like, this issue is not about religion, it's fundamentally about land. And all the way through the peace process, the settlement expansion continued on the West Bank. How are you going to look at me and say in good faith that is not a key reason for the continuing radicalization of the population? Of course they're going to do that. What do you think is going to happen?
No, exactly. Yeah.
It's like when people say, well, Israel has the right to respond and to protect itself. I mean, I think that's a stupid way of framing it. It's like the Israeli state will respond because that's what states do. But the opposite is also equally true. It's like, well, if you keep dispossessing people or putting them down and implementing collective punishment on them, what do you think is going to happen? It's kind of, it's I remember, once the magnitude of this, October 7th attack became apparent, the two things that came to my mind is like, A, there's a bunch of people here who are like doing the LARPing celebration of an attack, which is going to have like horrendous backlash. Yeah. And the other one is just people who are like acting like, how could this happen? It's like, well, if you put people in conditions akin to Escape from New York, you're going to get the juke.
Yeah, no, exactly. And on, the point about, again, when do you start the clock? Because, for Walter, it's all about, who's on offense and who's on defense, which I think is a pretty stupid metaphor. And yes, I think if somebody constantly talks about Israel's right to defend themselves, but they never talk about the Palestinians having the right to defend themselves, it's pretty clear that, a right to self-defense is not actually like a sort of abstract universal right to self-defense is not actually what's motivating them. But yeah, I think this when you start the clock thing is absolutely crucial because, and I think it's really brought out by thinking about his two quotes that he loves from, I guess two of his favorite war criminals, Golda Meir and Benjamin Netanyahu, who when he was talking about the Golda Meir quote, he said something interesting. It's like, the Palestinians or the Hamasians is how he referred to who Golda Meir was talking about. But it's like, look, she said that in 1957. And by the way, she said the Arabs because she famously made a big point of denying that there was such a thing as Palestinian people.
That's the whole
Hamas wasn't even founded until 1987, 30 years after that, which also, by the way, I think gives the answer to the Benjamin Netanyahu quote, which is like, if we laid down our arms, there'd be, they're like, we'd be wiped out, right? If they laid down our arms, there'd be peace. No, look, Palestinians on the West Bank and Gaza largely laying down their arms. In other words, there not being much armed activity originating from them. Hey, that was tested for the first couple decades after 1967. I mean, the PLO existed, but I mean, that wasn't largely stuff that was based in the West Bank and Gaza. From 1967 to the first Intifada, you saw what was going to happen.
The Israelis used to go to Gaza to get cheap car repairs, in the 1970s. I mean, it's this is why I said, Bloch is implying that all Palestinians want to wipe out Jews, because he is aligning Hamas with the entirety of the Palestinian population.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably more clearly aligning those two things than just about anybody I've seen talk about this stuff. In his debate with me, he explicitly said the Palestinians writ large have lost their rights because they're criminals, right? That's how he put it. And in a way, this is like the most unlibertarian thing about Walter Bloch. Look, he's a fucking collectivist. He, in the sort of stupid Ayn Rand way of using that phrase, that he doesn't think in terms of individuals, at least not when he's thinking about the Middle East. He thinks in terms of these vast ethnic hive minds, right? That's why, he keeps talking about the Jews, right? They want to kill the Jews, that it's the Jews and the Palestinians, or maybe even the Arabs, rather than just the Palestinians. When, it's like, look, even Palestinians are millions of people who have, who are divided into different political factions and interest groups, and, tons and tons of people who are relatively apolitical, like most human beings are, at least, have political reactions to things, but, aren't, are really just trying to get through their own lives. But, for Walter Bloch, I mean, it's about this sort of vast tribal categories, because if it's not about that, this position just kind of becomes incomprehensible.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, and that's the problem with the entire way that the conflict is often framed, is it's like you're dealing with like all Palestinians versus all Israelis. And even though I reject that kind of framing, you can have, the irony is you can make that case much better with regard to Israelis, considering they have like regular elections and democratically elected politics, that they're choosing this, as opposed to the Palestinians, where you have like a very deformed democratic process, which is almost almost entirely kind of sputtered out in recent years. And basically you have, kind of two tin pot dictatorships, one in Gaza, one in the West Bank, who, don't rule through democratic means. So you're blaming all the Palestinians. Like when people go, well, the Palestinians voted for Hamas. I mean, did they? I mean, when was the last election?
My understanding is that Hamas got a plurality in one election 18 years ago, and there hasn't been one since then.
And more than half of the population is under 18, which means that probably less than a quarter of the population voted in that election, and then that quarter that did vote in that election probably only maybe half voted for Hamas, which means that you're just like, and they did it 16 years ago, and largely because they're fed up of corruption.
Whereas Israel, again, I would reject that kind of bin Ladenist logic that blames entire populations for the actions of their government, whether it's the Palestinians, Israelis, Americans, or anybody else. Obviously I'm a socialist. I don't identify the population of the country with the people who run the country. But if, again, as you say, you could make an infinitely better case in the Israeli direction than the Palestinian one, because Israelis actually get to vote in regular elections. Netanyahu keeps winning these elections, even after he commits extreme war crimes. A vastly larger percentage of Israelis are part of their armed force than Gazans are part of Hamas. Out of 2.3 million estimated pre-war population of Gaza, there were about 30,000 Hamas fighters, is the usual estimate. Whereas Israel has universal conscription, right? So again, I don't, if you were, my God, I mean, try to imagine somebody bombing Israel to the point where it's like, oh, we have to keep going until we've definitely killed every single off-duty person who's in the IDF reserves, and anybody who's connected with them in any way, right? Like, what does that sound like a recipe for? That would be exactly what's going on in Gaza. But in any case, we have been talking for a while. We should watch Dave's response.
Okay. Dave, you can respond to Walter.
Okay. Well, where to start? It's bizarre to me to hear you citing these government propagandists as if what they're saying is anything other than just the state propaganda line, and Benjamin Netanyahu particularly. All right. So let me just, a few things here, okay? Because you said a lot, and I want to quickly try to respond to as much of it as I can. So first off, when you started there talking about how, look, libertarians do have disagreements about immigration, about abortion, about children's rights, there's lots of issues that libertarians do have disagreements about. However, there's also lots of issues that we just don't have disagreements about. And if somebody were to come out and say, I love socialism and gun control, I don't know that they should be at the Mises Institute anymore. You know what I mean? Like, and you could sit there and say, well, hey, how come we can disagree about immigration, but we can't disagree about socialism and gun control? And it's like, because there's just no libertarian justification for those two. And it's everything we're against. And I got to say, likewise, that's what's going on with this war here. There is, Walter is attempting one, but I just don't think any of it follows. Look, you can say that my analogy was disanalogous, but yours is the one that really fails here. Nobody is saying, if Hamas fighters had broken into Israel on October 7th with 3 babies strapped to them and just been gunning at people, and the IDF had gunned back at them and killed the babies in the process, you wouldn't be hearing anything from me, or I don't think any other libertarians, about how this is aggression. Yes, in that example, you're clearly defending yourself. The fire's coming at you, and if there's babies in the way, hey, you got to defend yourself. However, let's just say someone breaks into my house, shoots at me, maybe even kills a few people in my house, then runs away. Then I use an AI program called Where's Daddy to locate them back to their house where they are with their wife and 3 small children. And then I decide to bomb that house, kill all of them, not at the point that they're firing rockets at me, not at the point that they're shooting bullets at me. After that's happened, just because I want revenge against those people or I want to kill the bad guy, that is, by any definition, an act of aggression. If an individual were to do that, they would be prosecuted for murder in the 1st degree. It's not self-defense. So whatever analogy you want to find that actually describes the vast amount of killing that's happening in Gaza right now, none of them are this scenario where somebody is shooting at you, you've got a gun to your head, and you have no choice but to either defend yourself or you're going to die. That's not the situation. The situation is that they're leveling entire cities and killing people by the tens of thousands. I mean, I'm not going to get into exactly what the numbers are. None of us exactly know for sure. But you could look at the number of bombs that have been dropped, the population density, and some of the images out of there to know a lot of innocent people have been killed. And that's an act of aggression. I mean, this is very clearly an act of aggression to kill innocent people who had nothing to do with October 7th. And it doesn't matter who they politically support either. That's like weird Osama bin Laden logic that those people like lose their rights somehow. As far as Netanyahu's claim that if Israel were to put down their weapons, the Jews would all be killed. But if the Palestinians were to put down their weapons, there would be peace. Look, this is like such a useless propaganda line from a corrupt politician. But I mean, of course, we're never going to get to a. First off, I wouldn't advise that Israel put down their weapons. But we're never going to get to a world where there's 0 weapons on the other sides. We like, it's I think it was Harry Brown's old line about how the federal government can't even keep drugs out of federal prison. But we can't even keep weapons out of prisons. So it doesn't matter there's always going to be some degree of weaponry. But if you zoom out and look at it and say, well, what if the Palestinians were totally defeated and Israel had all of the power? Within reason, we've seen what happens with that. Israel is 100,000 times more powerful than the Palestinians, and that's why they've dominated them since before the creation of the state of Israel. And so we see what actually happens when the Palestinians essentially are toothless. And what happens is they get subjugated forever. The status quo is supposed to continue forever. And that is Benjamin Netanyahu's plan, that they will never get their own state. They will never get their independence. They are subjects of Israel and have been since 1967. And again, this is just from any libertarian starting point. If it's homesteading and property rights, well, then Israel has violated the property rights of the Palestinians since before the creation of the state of Israel. And if you're talking about the non-aggression principle, then clearly my analogy is much closer to being accurate here. It's not, we would never accept if I got mugged or beat up by a black guy in Chicago, we would never accept that now I get to just slaughter black people in Chicago. We get to just start bombing them because a crime was committed. And if you're a Rothbardian, if you're a libertarian, then that logic should apply to bigger groups also.
I guess it's my turn.
Yep. Go ahead.
Tom was worried that we'd interrupt each other. I'm glad we're having a civil conversation. I expected nothing else. And I want to compliment Dave. There are people who are cowards who will not debate me. Hans Hoppe, Tom DiLorenzo, Ryan.
Just got to stop for a minute to say this was fucking hilarious. He did the same thing when he was talking to me. That he'd do these like laundry lists of the like libertarians he's mad won't debate him on this. That this is the pettiest thing. So it's like this is like if I were debating Walter Block and I was like, oh, I'm so glad you're doing this. You know who won't? Fucking Jimmy Dore, right? Like I think this is like the libertarian equivalent of that.
Sounds like it. I mean, like, why even bring it up?
It's a really weird thing to say. Okay, never mind. I just wanted to say that.
Ryan McMakin, Michael Rechtenwald. They take pot shots at me and they refuse to debate me. They refuse to even respond to me. I find that despicable and cowardly, and I'm glad that Dave Smith is not like that. There is such a thing in libertarian theory called a continuum. What's a continuum? A continuum means that you can't deduce anything from libertarian theory. For example, statutory rape law. We know that if you go to bed with a 5-year-old girl, you're a statutory rapist.
How long are we at? 29 minutes in, and already we get to the key libertarian issue.
Age of consent, yes.
Abolition of age of consent laws. I mean, this is the fundamental premise of libertarian.
Yeah. It's like, all right. All this war and peace and property right. Yeah. When are we going to talk about age of consent?
That's what I'm talking about. That's a bit where left and right can be together. Sparts, my favorite trots, they're against age of consent laws too.
Yeah. I think Sparts and libertarians have a very similar brain condition. But let's see.
We don't care that she agreed. We don't think she's capable of any such a thing. We know that if you go to bed with a 25-year-old woman, whatever you are, you're not a statutory rapist, because we think that 25-year-old women are mature enough to agree to go to bed with you or not. Well, where do you draw the line? 16, 18, 17, 14, 19. You can't deduce. You can't say, well, it's 17 years old.
What's that?
He needs to tell us, where does he draw the line,
now that he's broached this crucial topic,
14, 15, is he maybe he should be on the side of the Islamists who can knock it down, make a case for 9 and above. So, whatever you want.
Yeah, it's a beautiful
I just love that they managed to shoe in the old age of consent laws. It's really a classic.
17 is reasonable. I wouldn't object to 17, but you can't deduce it from the non-aggression principle. I'm now going to punch Tom. He's in Florida. I'm in New Orleans. We're friends. He knows I'm never going to do anything like that. But if I get closer and closer to him and the light glints off my wristwatch and it's in a dark alley, then he can shoot me in self-defense. Well, where do you draw the line? You can't deduce anything like that from libertarian theory. You have to have a jury of your peers to decide. That's what Dave is trying to do here. He's trying to pull the continuum on me. I started out with people like this in front of me, and Dave agrees. Dave agrees with me over here. And his first attempt to undermine this is a murderer runs into a school. That didn't work too well. And then he gets closer in the continuum and he says, well, the murderer goes back to his own home. And then he tries again. He says blacks in Chicago. And
not going to keep pause it at this rate, but I do just want to note that the murderer goes back to his own home was not like an attempt at a closer analogy. It was literally just a description of the IDF's military tactics, that they use this app, right? Where's Daddy, to wait until people come home in order to bomb their houses, right? And he was saying, if literally that exact thing that they do, right, was done in any other situation, you would not have the slightest doubt that this doesn't count as an instance of self-defense, that you wait until the murderer is home with their wife and children, and then you bomb them there. So this is to answer the important question from the civilian victim of Havana syndrome, this is almost the same puppet show he did with me, but I don't think the trophy was part of it. I think it was just the pig and the rabbit at that point. So I think actually after his discussion with me, he realized that he needed to expand the cast a little bit.
Admire Dave's attempt. I admired his brain power. I think that what he's doing is very good from his side, but I can't allow that to occur. because it's as if we're on, because what's happening in actuality is this. No, he's right. No, Hamas came with babies and started shooting on October 7th. Fair enough. But that's what they're doing. They are shooting rocket launches from hospitals. They are putting rocket launchers in the middle of mosques, in the middle of residential areas. And then Israel, what is Israel supposed to do? Are they supposed to be pacifists? Are they supposed to commit suicide? Are they supposed to say, because Hamas has innocent Gazans in its power, they shouldn't do anything? That seems to be the logical implication of what Dave is saying. And Dave, you can't say that. You can't say that Israel shouldn't be able to do anything like that. Yes, they're pulverizing a lot of houses. You know why they're pulverizing a lot of houses? Because the Hamas put booby traps in there. And I think something like 1,000 Israeli soldiers have already died. Why have they died? Because they're trying to reduce the deaths of civilians. Israel is a civilized country. They drop leaflets. Hamas doesn't drop any leaflets. They put booby traps in these houses. Then he talks about Hamas. Look, I don't understand this thing about weapons in prisons. I just don't get that. Bibi Netanyahu is an imperfect person. And by the way, I'm honored that he wrote a foreword to my book, my book in 2021 with Alan Fuderman. I'm just happy to be associated with him in that regard. Yes, if Israel put down their weapons, there'd be no more Israel and no more Jews. Why? Because do you know what's in the Hamas convention or the Hamas constitution? Kill all Jews, and not just the ones in Israel, the ones anywhere. Kill them all. They've promised many October 7th. They've got to be wiped out in self-defense. And now Dave is saying it's not self-defense. Of course it's self-defense. These people have done an October 7th, which was a despicable a genocidal activity, and they promised more of it. And self-defense is an essence of the libertarian theory. And Dave is trying to take away self-defense from Israel by saying that this isn't true, but this is true. They are launching, even now, they're launching rockets to Israel. They still have about 100 hostages. This is a criminal gang. And when the Israeli sent out leaflets and say, move over here, Hamas won't let them move. And now what they have is safe zones. And guess what Hamas does? They go into the safe zones and start launching rockets again. And if they were in charge of Israel, if they were the prime minister of Israel and in charge of defending Israel, he would engage in suicide if he adheres to the principles that I hear him talking about now.
All right, so I'm going to stay out of it. You guys talk.
Well,
okay.
I mean, the principles I'm adhering to are Rothbardian principles, and yeah, that you're not allowed to kill innocent people. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward principle, and that doesn't mean you can't act in self-defense. And as you mentioned, there were the two just wars that Rothbard supported. So I guess I don't remember him writing that in For a New Liberty, but I guess he did contradict himself there. But you know, a lot of the framing of this is, I think, just a little bit off. Like, so for example, look, Israel and at least a huge part of the reason why they have this beef with the Palestinians is because they've been occupying / dominating Gaza and the West Bank since 1967. And so if we're going to say that launching rockets is justification for all of them to, you know, for Israel to do whatever it wants, I suppose, in response. Well, like, what about the right of defense for the Palestinians? I mean, why wouldn't they also have a right to, you know, Israel's launching a whole lot of rockets into Gaza, and you could say it's collateral damage. You know, it's really something to hear Walter Block, of all people, use this government term of collateral damage. That doesn't seem to me to be consistent with a libertarian analysis of this, which, again, this is why I'm going back to these analogies where it's like, in you know what I'm saying, like, short of direct self-defense, You don't just get to extrapolate self-defense and then claim it's a defensive action when you're killing a whole lot of innocent people, when you don't absolutely have to do that to protect yourself or other people. And so why is it that we just have to kind of grant this this different status to Israel, where they are, everything they do is self-defense? However, say the people of Gaza, who are under a total blockade since 2006 and were under a military occupation since 1967. Before that, I would think they would have a right to self-defense as well. Another quick thing I just wanted to mention, because I didn't respond to this earlier, but when Walter makes a fair enough point with the boxers analogy, where the question isn't, is one guy good or bad? The question is how good they are in, relative to the other guy. I would just to narrow that down even more. I think that what a libertarian would be concerned with is who's right in the conflict, not necessarily just who's better. So if there was a bar fight or something like that, and in a libertarian society, and a libertarian private cop came to figure out what happened, his concern would be who started it, who's the aggressor here. And if you were to say, like, okay, this guy was the aggressor, but he's really great to his wife and his friends, and he's got a really nice house, and he treats her, you'd be like, yeah, and all of that is irrelevant. The question is, did he start the fight here? And likewise, I think you could certainly argue that the United States of America was a more libertarian society than Saddam Hussein's Iraq. But the question is, who was the aggressor in that fight? And so I think that whatever nice things there might be about Israel, and there certainly are some, I think that if we're judging this conflict, the question has to be, who is the aggressor in this conflict? And I don't think it's fair to say that because of October 7th, therefore the Palestinian people are the aggressors. The fact is that this conflict goes way back to before then, and I would argue that the Zionist settlers, and the Israeli government have been the aggressors in the conflict with the Palestinians.
Very well said. I couldn't agree with you more. Your point about the cop in the bar is excellent, exquisite. We don't care whether he's a nice guy or not. We care who started it. Who started it is crucial. So who started it? It wasn't the Jews. The Jews have been kicked out of every country you can name in Europe.
Again, just want to point out Walter's tendency to default to these vast ethnic hive minds, right? Rather than talking about, nation states, political factions. It's the Jews.
Yeah, I mean, and he just got the dog walked, as they say. I mean, he, like, on his own terms, he got the dog walked with him. Was that what you say? Walking the dog, dog in the walk. He got like slapped around, and like you say, like, history is a litany of barbarism, right? That's all it is. Frankly, like, as a historical question, seeing which groups are responsible, what, etc., is interesting, but I don't see how it really helps.
Right.
At this point, I mean, you might say, yes, it was all the Zionist movement's fault. Therefore, well, it's like, okay, we're not going to send everyone to Poland or whatever people are going to think. People are going to have to live together, right? It's not that. It's a historical question. Perhaps it has some relevance, some things like things, but like ultimately, framing a conflict in this way through this huge all Jews, all Palestinians, it's a recipe for a kind of genocidal discourse, which we're seeing here. Which, I mean, frankly, it's like just really wacky.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely right, and I also. I mean, yes, clearly, I think that, who started it is a extremely insufficient prism to look at anything through, right? Because you want to know, you want to achieve peace and justice in the present moment, and that's going to have that's going to have limited relevance. But I also like it's because it's certainly not like certainly if your framework is all right, you do the forensic work like the libertarian private cop. What a awful dystopia, by the way, just parenthetically, but whatever. The libertarian private cop, is doing the forensic work to try to figure out who the initial aggressor is. Well, look, if you apply that to big historical conflicts, if your framework is once you've established that, then like everything that group does is fine, right? That justifies everything, or and to be fair, I don't think Dave would quite say that, but in any case, like, yeah, I think that's a horrible framework. But also, if we are going to play this game, right, that's like, oh, everything Israel does is justified because it's on defense. It's like, well, I think Dave's response is obviously correct, and like it's like, look, how insanely limited an amount of time do you have to look at to come to that conclusion, right? It has to be that, like, 10 minutes before midnight, October 6th is the beginning of history. Or else, you'd have to, forget, 1948 and the original ethnic cleansing and, everything that even led up to that or whatever, which, again, if you're interested in libertarian property rights, my God, right? But you have to ignore, like, earlier in 2023 that, like the whole reason, doesn't justify October 7th, but if we're interested in trying to figure out why things happened, causation, not justification, then, earlier in 2023, Israel had been, there had been the unprecedented wave of settler pogroms on the West Bank. And there's an area that's like, about the outskirts of Ramallah to Jericho that, is almost completely free of Palestinian villagers at this point. That like, and which Hamas definitely mentioned in their statements after October 7th about why they'd done it. Israel was aggressively pursuing the strategy of regional normalization that was very explicitly all about ensuring that the occupation could continue forever into eternity, right? Because it would take away the only remaining card that Palestinians had, which was the nominal solidarity of Arab states, for whatever that's worth.
And I actually, though, I have to say, like, my contrarian position on the whole Abraham Accords was that actually it's a positive thing, because the reason it's a positive thing was these Arab dictatorships would make peace with Israel. They were already at peace with Israel, but it would become explicit, and they wouldn't be able to play this dirty anti-Semitism game every time they needed a little bit of internal legitimacy. Like, one of the most cynical things that these countries do is often, I'll give you a good example of this. Erdogan has been talking a lot about the Palestinians, and then for months it turned out the Turks were like making tons of money shipping heavy materials to Israel. Then they got caught, and then they said, okay, now we're going to do some blockades. And all of a sudden, and I don't know how true this is, so maybe it's wrong. I was reading a Turkish journalist. It's like, they blockaded they're not selling things to Israel, but suddenly imports to the West Bank and Palestinian Authority of heavy materials have increased 500% ever since they stopped, so they're doing the whole like, oh, we'll just ship it to the Palestinian Authority and then ship it to Israel. So a lot of countries were just basically trying to have their cake and eat it, have good relations with Israel behind the door while screaming about Jewish people.
Yeah, removing that hypocrisy might be a good thing as far as the domestic policy of those countries goes. But clearly the reason why Israel wanted them to remove the hypocrisy
of course.
To remove any sort of pressure whatsoever towards ever doing any kind of two-state solution or anything, right? That's
now they explicitly say it. Once again, the Knesset, they've, as they say, they have defecated the bed by saying the quiet part out loud. Which again, I actually think is a positive development, because at least they're saying it now. At least they've said it.
Fair enough. Let's keep going.
Europe and elsewhere, Somehow the Jews got on the bad radar of a lot of people. The Arabs started it way before Israel, way before there was any land grabbing or any claim of that sort. In 1929 in Hebron, there was a pogrom. There were many, many pogroms in Israel and everywhere else. And the Jews don't start any of that stuff. The Jews are a bunch of nerds. You know, they're the people of the book. They don't, we don't. I think Dave and I are both Jewish. So we're not noted for starting fights. And if anything, we're noted for running away. Except when Israel started, then all of a sudden we don't run away. But before that, we run away. The question is, who is more right?
What's that?
That's such a deeply the idea that Jews ran away, and this comes down to the abuse of the Holocaust. You know, like in Israel until really the Eichmann trial. You know, like there was a deep ambivalence towards Holocaust survivors, and this idea that they just lay down and let themselves kill. But you know, Jewish people fought the Nazis. Jewish people have participated in political struggles for centuries. You know, the idea that Jewish people, were just passive victims of society is kind of like offensive, especially when you look at the history of the Second World War and the role of Jewish partisans in fighting back against fascism. It's just
I mean, it's part of the considerable rhetorical overlap between Zionism and classical anti-Semitism. I mean, this is kind of the old school Zionist rhetoric that it's like that basically just sort of takes as fact the old anti-Semitic stereotypes about diaspora Jews and say, oh, look at how weak and pathetic and unmanly these people were, but don't worry, once we get a blood and soil national project of our own, then we can fix all that. And then, we can make a real man out of you. So yeah, I mean, but it is like, yeah, this idea that that Jews in general are any more cowardly than anybody else is ironically more than a little bit anti-Semitic.
And now I'm glad that he brought up the question of land, because there are really two issues. One is, was any land stolen, and if so, from whom? Now, look, one of the basics of libertarianism is homesteading. The rightful owner of contested land is the one who was there first. If I homestead first and then Dave comes along and grabs my land, he stored it up. I was innocent. Well, who was there first? The Jews have been around, I don't know, 6 millennia, 5,700 years. They've been in the Israeli area for 4,000 years. When did the Muslims start? Only 1,400 years ago. The Muslims are Johnny-come-latelys, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it just that Muhammad didn't start in until the 6th century, whereas the Jews were there way, way before. Look, the Second Temple and the mosque, which is built above which? The Second Temple is below, and then the mosque is on top. This indicates that the Second Temple was there first. The Kohanim, the Cohens, Jews, were there first, and they built the first temple and then the second temple, and then they got kicked out by the Romans. The Jews were there first. They were the homesteaders of it. So, Michael, Dave is absolutely right. The question is, who started up? And the answer is, the Jews didn't start up. It was the Arabs that started up. No, they didn't start up on October 7th. Look, in 2005, what happened was that the Israeli government violated private property rights and kicked out all the Jews from Gaza. This was wrong. This is a violation of property rights, but they did it. And what they really wanted was for Gaza to be the Hong Kong of the Middle East. They would have helped them. And the Gazans got a lot of wealth and a lot of cement and a lot of metal. What did they do with the wealth and the cement and the metal? Did they build hotels? No. Did they build desalination plants? No. Did they build other civilian type operations? No. Did they build roads? Yes, they built roads. They were underground, and they were used not to transport people, but to hide weapons and to use them as launching pads for suicide bombers. So I agree with Dave. Who started first is the crucial issue, but it was not the Jews. We didn't start up first. They started up first, and they have in their constitution that you got to kill all Jews. How can you bargain with people like that? Now, look, again, I return to this. Dave says part of libertarianism is you're not allowed to kill innocents. That's wrong. Even Dave and Tom agreed. Well, I don't know about Tom. He didn't say anything. But even Dave agreed that if they came in with people like that, it would be okay to kill innocents. So Dave contradicts himself. He says, on the one hand, you're not allowed to kill innocents. On the other hand, you are allowed to kill people if they do this. Now take abortion for a second. A 12-year-old girl is walking down the street. 12-year-old gets grabbed. 12-year-old girl gets raped. And now the 12-year-old girl is pregnant.
Ben,
There is a debate among libertarians as to
What's that?
Then we get back to the case of underage women. There's a theme running through here. There's a theme. It's all I'm saying.
It is remarkable, I've got to say.
How many times do we have to bring up hooking, sexual stuff with teenagers? I'm not feeling comfortable with it. Like, Walter Blunt is not making me feel safe.
Yeah. I mean, this is it is kind of remarkable how it is kind of remarkable how often sexual assault metaphors come up in libertarian rhetoric. Honestly, Walter isn't even the worst offender as far as that goes.
I mean, I think next time you do a libertarian debate, you really need to do a drinking game. Every time someone brings up age of consent laws or underage women being impregnated, I think you drink.
Right. Fair enough.
So what can happen? According to the pro-choice people, and Murray Rothbard is pro-choice, she can have an eviction. Well, when does life start? Well, in the Jewish tradition, life starts when you graduate medical school. That's a joke. Not very funny, but what the heck? Gotta lighten up things. Actually, it's when the heart beats, but that's a different issue. In my view, a life starts with the fertilized egg. The sperm alone, the egg alone will create a human being. The fertilized egg is a young human being. And Murray Rothbard, and I'm a Rothbardian, Murray Rothbard says it's okay to kill that human being. So when Dave says that there's something wrong or anti-libertarian about killing innocent people, he's wrong on two grounds. Here's one ground, and the other ground is abortion, at least from the Rothbardian point of view. My own view on abortion is a little different. I don't want to get into it heavily, but let me just mention evictionism. And in my view, the proper view on abortion is evictionism. And you're always able to evict because you own the private property of your body, the woman. And it's unfortunate that in the first 6 months, if you evict, the baby will die. But in the last trimester, you're allowed to evict, but you're not allowed to kill. So again, we have another example where, according to libertarianism, it's okay to kill innocents. It's not only okay, but it's legal. And libertarianism is a theory of what should the law be. And the law should be, yes, you're allowed to kill innocents sometimes. And there's nothing wrong with the concept of collateral damage. We have to describe in some way the killing of innocent people that are subjugated by Hamas. If you have a better word than collateral damage, I'll adopt it. But in the absence of any better word, it's better than genocide. It's better than purposely killing innocent people, which is what Hamas does.
Hey, everybody, is the free market really going to be able to solve the problems posed by some of these terrible big tech companies?
No, certainly not. But let's skip ahead.
Federated.computer today for your free 30-day trial and use coupon code WOODS for 10% off your first 6 months.
Okay. So first of all, that you can just make a correction. You're right about that. So can't kill innocent people if it's not in immediate self-defense. And so something like that. You're right. And I disagree with Rothbard on being pro-choice. So that's a whole separate debate that we don't need to have right now. Look, the claim that this kind of almost supernatural property rights claim because the Jews were there first, whatever exactly that means or whatever exactly the truth of that is. A mutual friend, I believe, of the three of, or the two of you, I don't actually really know him, but Sheldon Richmond wrote a fantastic book called Coming to Palestine. It was published by the Libertarian Institute. I highly recommend people read it, in which he has David Ben-Gurion's quote about how he really thought that basically what happened was all the Romans didn't really kick out all the Jews. They basically ended up converting to Islam. So I don't even know if it's correct, but regardless of that, this is just, I mean, this is like saying that I could go, because I have Jewish DNA, I can go kick someone in the West Bank out of their house right now because I could say my people were here way before your people were here. This is not the way that libertarians ever conceptualize of property rights. And the truth is that the Palestinians who were living in Palestine, who had been there for hundreds of years, and were in houses that they themselves had built or their grandfathers or fathers had built, and the fact that they got kicked out of those homes, many of them still have land, the older ones still have land deeds, still have keys to those old homes. That's just indefensible from a libertarian position. They had the homesteading rights of that, and nobody can say, oh, but I was here thousands of years ago or something like that, therefore I have the right to kick you out of your house and not let you back into it. I just don't see how any libertarian can, if that were the logic we were to go off of, I don't know where it would lead to, but I've taken my DNA test. I think maybe I could go back to like Austria or Ukraine or something like that and just kick some people there out of their homes if I was there genetically, my line was there before theirs was. So I don't think that makes sense. I also think that, as I guess kind of the point I was getting at the beginning of this, where I was saying like, oh, Israel are the bad guys here. And libertarians, like, we don't like governments. We look at all of them as criminal organizations. But then, and I understand you could say theoretically, I don't think it applies in this situation, but you could say, well, relative to this other government, this government's much better. But I don't think any of this would require us to like swallow the government propaganda in this way, Walter, and say, all Israel wanted was for Gaza to become the new Singapore. They just wanted Gaza to, I mean, like, Israel was, Ben Swan, who's a great journalist, just had a piece up on this today. Israel was, for years, facilitating cash payments directly to Hamas to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, some estimated at over $1 billion, with the explicitly stated goal of keeping Hamas in power in Gaza so that it would divide the Palestinians and it would thwart the creation of a Palestinian state. I mean, like, not only Netanyahu, but senior members in his war cabinet, his advisors, his opposition parties, they have all explicitly said this in their own words, that was the goal, was to keep Hamas in power, keep the radical Islamists in power. Therefore, you never have to deal with these people. Therefore, you never have to have pressure from liberal Jews within Israel who don't want to be occupiers. And you don't get pressure from the international community because you can say, look, they're a bunch of terrorists. And this way, we never have to give them their independence. We never have to give them their own state. This is... To sum that up is like, oh man, it's just these Jews who we always run away from fights. We never pick fights, and we just wanted you guys to be prosperous and happy. If Israel actually wanted Gaza to be prosperous and happy, they would have ended the blockade a long time ago. They would have ended the occupation many years, many decades ago. And same with the West Bank. That's not the goal. They want the land, and they explicitly say this. In their own words, Netanyahu showed up to the UN with a map of greater Israel that included the West Bank and Gaza. They call it Judea and Samaria, and they're still building up settlements in the West Bank to this day, which is totally in violation of international law. And almost, I'd say about 80% of the Zionists even are opposed to it. But they're still building up settlements in the West Bank and mistreating the Palestinians. I just don't like like, I'm not one of these guys, and I think if you look at any of my my debates on this, I'm not one of these guys who just tells like a one-sided history where at every single turn Israel was wrong and the Arabs were always right, and every act of Arab violence was just done in self-defense, or it was just because they had. I'm not that. The Arabs, there have been terrorists amongst the Arabs. They've embraced terrorism a long time ago. It was an awful decision for them. It was also an awful decision, just morally speaking. But I think that this is it's a somewhat, it's like a funhouse mirror version of history to act like Israel has never aggressed against the Palestinians. They really had no right to the country to begin with. The project of creating the nation was, when put into plan, resulted in hundreds of thousands of Palestinians being kicked out of their homes and never allowed to return. And they've been dominating Gaza and the West Bank ever since, essentially. This is all indefensible from any type of libertarian position.
All right, that's probably a fair way to that's probably a fair place to cut off for tonight. By the way, Gene, read the private chat. But in any case, yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that, you know, I continue to find particularly remarkable about Walter's position is, you know, the extreme ethnic essentialism that, you know, both holds, that, you know, you have, you know, Jews as a group have these general properties of not starting fights, etc., right? As if like entire ethnicities you know, have personalities, and also that like you have these property rights that are based on what, like religious affiliations. So if you're a so if you're a Jewish person whose descendants stayed Jewish, you have greater property rights than somebody whose like descendants converted to Islam.
I mean, it makes no sense to me, and it really speaks to the weird kind of exceptionalisms that this conflict is always framed through. You know, and I often complain about this. You know, I think there are some people on the pro-Palestinian side who have like a kind of weird fixation with this as some kind of sui generis conflict on some way. But really, the biggest kind of exceptionalists on this, libertarians and liberals, who in any other, you know, if you were talking about any other conflict with a similar dynamics, they would be speaking a completely different way. But here they retreat to kind of ethnic essentialism and like defending, you know, rejecting kind of basic liberal principles of universalism, which is kind of like a perverse brain rot, if you ask me. It's just very weird. You know, when I argue with people on this topic, you know, people who on every other condition have like a kind of liberal principles, suddenly they, you know, devolve into kind of ethnic and racial essentialism. Like this group did this group did that, and it really speaks to the fact that this conflict is kind of it's like you know, Israel is, you know, Bloch used this term civilized. You know, Israel is just a sectarian militia like everybody else in the Middle East, right? Except they have the backing of the world superpower and all the advanced weapons. But what is it? Is it really that different from, you know, any other sectarian militia? It acts like it when dealing with its opponents, right?
Totally.
You know, it's the only difference is that they can do so from the safety of like you know, they don't necessarily have to go in with the machetes. They can use high-tech weapons and feel good about themselves that they're doing everything clinically. Because it takes, you know, some hardcore action to like gut someone with a knife, but you know, it's a lot easier to do it when you press a button.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Although the sort of degree of personalness of a lot of the war crimes in Gaza has been kind of amazing to see. That even if, you know, most of the killing is done with bombs, certainly not all of it, but I mean, in fact, there was famously an incident, where there were, Israeli hostages who were shot by the Israeli military, and like part of the justification was that they were, their captors had put them in like hijabs while they were, they were transporting them, from one place to another, to try to stay a step ahead. And apparently it was just sort of taken for granted that anybody who looked like that, was going to get shot in that situation. Right. So I think in a lot of ways, I mean, it really does feel like I mean, this really does feel like a sort of, Rwanda level of sectarian militia behavior, except as you said, with a extremely good military budget and geopolitical positioning. But I mean, I think that the sort of basic motivations and behavior are really not that different from sectarian militias in any number of ethnic civil wars. Okay, so we do have about half an hour left to the debate. This is normally where we would go to the post game. But Djene has a time conflict tonight, so we are. I think what we're actually going to do, rather than me just doing the post game solo, so you would miss out on all of Djene's wit and wisdom. We are going to move watching the last half hour of this to the post game on Monday night. So you can have more Mean Djene in your life. So on that note, I think we are going to leave off here, but I will see you. I will see you again on Monday for the main show, and then to finish watching this, left is best.